Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to Rising Sun Retro. Today we'll be looking at Biohazard 2, or as it's known worldwide,
Resident Evil 2.
So Resident Evil 2 was actually released in the US first on January 21st, 1998. A Japanese release followed on the 29th of the same month. PAL territories got the game a bit later in April of the same year. That said, there are some clues in the game that lead people to believe that actually the Japanese version was finished before the international one. The development of the game is legendary amongst fans. About 60 to 80% of it was completed before being totally scrapped in order to start over. What we got was the result of that restart, and the pre-scrapped version is known as Resident Evil 1.5. The reason being was that apparently the producer Shinji Mikami, the director of the first game, was dissatisfied with the product and ordered them to take drastic measures. Characters, scenarios, and locations were changed wholesale. There's a lot to go over honestly, but I think that's a video for another day because it's something I want to take a deep dive into. But anyway, going back to the released product, this time we have a reversal. Remember last time I said that Biohazard was fully uncut while the international releases were censored? Here we have a bit of a switcheroo and the Japanese version has the violence toned down. This trend would continue in future releases even to this day. That said, I do use toned down lightly since it's really just the game over screens that get censored. In the Japanese version it fades to a black screen. Where in the international versions you see everything happening. The difficulty was toned up in the international versions apparently as a means to appeal to American players. That said, there are more items and drops, so I guess it evens out more or less. One thing that bums me out is the live action cutscenes are gone in this game, and instead what we have are cutscenes that are rendered with 3D models. It makes sense, since games started to move away from FMV cutscenes at this point. There's just something about that cheesiness of the original ones that makes me wish they were in this game too. The voice acting isn't as cheesy either, but it's nothing spectacular. The graphics have improved a bit over the original as well. Now I know it might not seem like a big deal, but character models do look more detailed. There's more variety in zombies this time around, and so on. I think it's a really nice looking game, and the detail really stood out to me going from the first game to this one. Like the first game, you have two choices for characters. Leon S. Kennedy makes his debut along with Claire Redfield, sister of Chris from the first game. Leon just so happens to be having the worst first day of work ever, apparently getting into a fight and breaking up with his girlfriend before driving to work, being late, and then realizing it doesn't even matter since everyone's a zombie now. Claire rides in from out of town and also out of luck seeing as her brother won't answer her calls and she's being chased by zombies as soon as she gets in. They team up, although briefly, before being separated. You can start with either character and the events of the game will change depending on who you pick first. We'll get a bit more into that later though. They'll encounter mostly the same characters, but Leon's support consists of Ada Wong. She's mentioned in the first game and the team did this on purpose to tie the two games together. She's looking for John, the scientist who wrote about her at Arklay. She loves to run away from Leon every chance she gets to. You do have a few moments where you play as Ada halfway through the game. That said, she's nearly identical to Leon. With Claire, you'll be with Sherry, the daughter of two people who work for Umbrella. She always seems to be running off at the most inconvenient times like Ada, but generally she's a good kid. Your mission is to keep her alive, of course. Your goal overall with both characters is to escape the city, easier said than done. If you manage to do it, you'll be awarded with a grade at the end of the game. The Japanese version is ranked from S to D, while the international versions go from A to E. Your score depends on time, first aid sprays used, and how many times you save the game. Apparently using special weapons will automatically dock you a letter, but I used them in one of my playthroughs and still got an S, so I'm not sure what happened. In regards to general gameplay, Resident Evil 2 is very similar to the original game. Point, shoot, run away if necessary. Items like ink ribbons, herbs, and first aid sprays make reappearances to aid you on your journey. So if you've played any of the other classic games, you'll feel right at home here. Item management is a thing here, but it wouldn't be Resident Evil without it. but the strict 6 item slots Chris had doesn't make a return, thankfully. I think that would have been a bit too harsh here, honestly. And like I just mentioned, you're gonna have to be skillful when managing items because you'll be backtracking a lot. It doesn't feel quite as frustrating as the first game though, and you'll find chests outside of the save rooms as well. The game differs greatly from the first one in terms of location. Whereas you had a giant mansion that had underground labs and whatnot, here you've got the city, the former art museum turned police station, sewers, and, well, yeah, another laboratory, sure. That said, the police station is the main area, so to speak, and you'll be spending the bulk of the game here. These backdrops allow for a mix of gameplay styles, from claustrophobic spaces with tons of zombies in them, to more wide open areas and having room to breathe. It's almost constantly switching back and forth, even within the same place, so you always have to be on guard. The police station is one of my favorite settings in all of the series. The grand design of it all is just so unique, and I'm glad they went in this direction over the more realistic looking one. The virus has infected the entire city too, so not only will you see zombies, but you're gonna find lickers, giant spiders, and other creatures as well. Sure, you could spend all your time trying to shoot them, but the game encourages you to try and avoid them if possible. There's more than one way to fight. You won't find too many zombies that move fast, of course, but the other enemies will. If you're playing on the B scenario, you'll also encounter Mr. X. He lacks the fancy hat from the remake, but he's still a force to be reckoned with, of course. He'll pop up during your adventure, and your best bet is to outrun him. That said, he does have a certain set of attacks and movements. You can actually dodge him relatively easily, even in a cramped hallway. Speaking of moving around, yep, the tank controls are back. If you weren't a fan of them then, you won't be now. But I will say this, for some reason the game feels smoother to me movement-wise. I'm not sure if they changed up a lot, but Leon and Claire feel much easier to move around with, turn direction with, and so on. Honestly though, if worse comes to worse, you can just go get the DualShock version, which plays just fine. They didn't change the music either. The Japanese version of the game has auto-aim turned on by default, while the international versions do not. And you'll be shooting with an assortment of weapons in both versions. Leon and Claire both have their knives and pistols to start, but just like the first one, you're able to get other guns. And just like the first one, I am terrible with the knife, so I never use it. Ever. They also have their own character exclusive weapons too. Leon can get the shotgun and magnum, while Claire has the grenade launcher, crossbow, and spark shot. Weapons can be upgraded too if you find their parts throughout the game. You can get special weapons like the Gatling gun and submachine gun, but again these will drop your rating apparently. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are 2 ways to start the game, but there are core elements of the story that do remain throughout each playthrough. The first Resident Evil game features branching paths in a sense, where you can make certain choices to get different endings. According to director Hideki Kamiya, they couldn't quite implement that into this game, so near the very end of development, they added in this system of an A and B scenario described as zapping. So for example, if you start with Leon, once you clear the game, you'll have a new save available for Claire's B story and vice versa. The B side is a bit more challenging naturally, and the items are placed in different spots, but that said, if you got the layouts down at this point, you should be okay. In total, you have 4 different ways to play through the main story. The events don't totally line up, but that's okay because they do lead to the same outcome. So when you mix them all together, you have the real story in a sense. Interesting fact is that in Japanese, the first run-through is known as omote, translated as front or surface, while the second is known as ura, which translates to back or opposite, essentially meaning 2 sides of the same coin. The A playthrough doesn't affect the B playthrough so much, but there are a few instances where it does. For example, when you pick a certain set of windows to block with shutters, it'll be the same windows in the B scenario. There's also items you can get in the armory, a machine gun, and an extra item slot pouch. If you pick up one, it'll suggest you leave the other one for the other character, although you could pick it up anyway if you want. Another instance is the boss fight with the alligator. If you blow his head off in the A story, you're going to save the B character some trouble since he won't show up. It's really cool going through the game with both characters because it's fun to compare the different scenarios and what changes. And on the whole, when you compare the story length to the first game, it doesn't feel so long. So if you know what you're doing, you can kind of run through the game in a few hours. It can be really nerve-wracking, right, when you're walking by certain points where a monster comes out in the A scenario but not in the B one. And again, the opposite is also true. What they also do is they pan the camera out to certain angles to bait you, so you expect something's going to come out and it doesn't. That said, a little bit of a bummer is a lot of the puzzles are exactly the same between both stories, which, yeah, it's a bit of a letdown. I wish they switched up a bit more in the B story, making them a bit harder, for example. It's like when you play as Sherry and Ada, they do the exact same box puzzle without any differences. I guess Sherry's a bit tougher because she has no weapons and she's slower to climb things, but honestly, it's essentially the same thing. Music is something very critical to the survival horror genre because of the emotions it can evoke. Even the lack of music at the right time can be absolutely terrifying. There are some moments in this game where the music is just so sinister. Like this moment, for example, I love it. When you're in the stars room with either Leon or Claire, you'll talk for a little bit and then you'll have to leave. Go back in after leaving. The music changes to this. The direness of the situation begins to weigh on you, even though nothing's going to happen in this room. You really never know for sure. It's a shame this theme in particular is relegated to almost an Easter egg because it's one of my favorites. The save room theme as well. Talk about classic. Even in here you can't really relax, but it's fantastic. With Resident Evil 2, they were really going for a sense of dread and urgency at almost every turn. There really isn't anywhere to sit and take a break unless, again, yeah, it's the save room. Factoring in the B scenario, you can expect enemies to come up almost anywhere at any time. The spookiness comes from the unknown. Even with bright rooms and lit hallways, a zombie or something just popping up will definitely keep you on the edge. Sure, you might think it relies a lot on jump scares, and I guess it does in some points, but I think it works given the setting, and they're honestly spaced out appropriately. There's a whole lot to like about this game, from the actual gameplay itself, to the atmosphere, to the characters, and so on. I like the small details in this game too. For example, in the STARS office, if you go through Wesker's desk 50 times, you'll find film with a photo of Rebecca Chambers in a basketball uniform for some reason. The reason you have to keep pressing search so many times is to simulate your character ruffling through the desk frantically as one might in real life. It's a neat touch. I really like Leon and Claire as well. I also like that the loading screens from the first game are back. Going through those doors is just so iconic, and thankfully going up most stairs won't require you to load a whole new screen, for the most part. I like the part where you try to open a door to the back area and zombies actually appear on the loading screen. That made me jump the first time I saw it. One thing that is a bit funny to me is how sometimes the character's emotions can be a bit mismatched. Like when Leon meets Ben.
Let me guess, you must be Ben, right?
Either this guy stole his lunch money or he's mad that Ada is looking for him. Why is he so angry? This might have to do with the direction or perhaps translation of certain things. The Japanese version of the game features English voice acting like before, and there are moments where things are translated a bit differently. Now, of course, not everything was always going to be one for one. Sometimes the emotions are a bit different in my opinion. One scene has Leon saying, in a humorous way. The Japanese subtitle reads to the equivalent of "damn monster," as if he was almost screaming at it. Again, I'm really nitpicking the small nuance here, but there's quite a bit of this in the game actually, so it might explain some things. I mentioned ranks and whatnot when beating the game, and if you get a high enough score and beat a full A and B run, you can get an extra story, the fourth survivor. It's a canon story where an Umbrella agent tries to escape with a vial of the G virus. This mode is pretty tough. You have limited health and items and you have to fight your way through the sewers to the helipad on the second floor of the police station. There's also another unlockable, the Tofu Survivor. It's the same thing as Fourth Survivor except you play as a block of tofu. Oh, it's also the hardest mission in the game since you only have a knife, so good luck. Now, is the game perfect? No, of course not. It would be better without the tank controls, of course, but again, like I mentioned, the DualShock version, amongst other versions, mitigates this. I mentioned the puzzles between both scenarios, and so on. Of course, when you die, you're going to be sent back to the main menu. If you don't save for a while and you get killed by dogs or something that might cheese you and you can't move or anything, that's a bit unfair, and it can be pretty frustrating. You have to be careful because there's a limited amount of saves due to the ink ribbons, but honestly, you should be fine. That being said, though, I really have to dig deep to find things I don't like about this game because it's just such a solid package overall. So where does Resident Evil 2 stand nowadays? Well, we do have the remake out, but in my opinion, this game offers such a different experience and it has things in here that the remake doesn't have. If you only want the story, then yeah, go out and play that one, but I still recommend giving this one a shot, especially if you're a fan of the series. Echoing my previous criticisms of the first game, if you can't get used to the tank controls or the graphics, then you're just not going to enjoy this game. But I really think you'd be doing yourself a disservice. Whereas I was a bit more hesitant to recommend the first game, I would say that if you're going to play any of the original games, this is the one to get your hands on. There's just so much good things to say about this game, and the positives heavily outweigh the negatives. It's horror, thrills, excitement all rolled into one neat, tightly made package. The game is pretty accessible too. You have the original version and DualShock version for PlayStation, along with the PSN versions you can get on PS3 and PS Vita. It was also released on Windows, Nintendo 64, GameCube, and Dreamcast. Some are harder to find, like the GameCube version for example, and most of them have their own special features like Extreme Battle, so forth and so on. I'll link a video below explaining the differences between each one, so you can decide which one works for you. There's also a new mod for the GameCube version called the Seamless HD project that aims to remaster the game, which seems pretty cool to me. This might be the version to go for if you're not about outdated graphics. The touch-ups look amazing. At the end of the day, if I have to give this game a rating, I'd probably give it 4.5 stars. It's the controls that are keeping me from giving it a perfect 5. Because in my opinion, Resident Evil 2 feels like an improvement over the original in almost every way. It takes the formula, improves it, and sets a precedent for future games. It's a blast from the start and definitely a blast to finish. And in my opinion, definitely holds up.